My name is Bella Howard, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one, the hardworking one, the person who always had to put in twice the effort just to get half the recognition in my family. That night at the country club, when my dad Carson was praising my sister Sophie in front of everyone while calling me selfish, something inside me finally snapped completely. After 3 years of silent sacrifice, I told the truth, and the look on his face, followed by that uncomfortable silence, was worth every second of what came after. But before I tell you how I finally stood up for myself after years of being called selfish, let me know where you're watching from and if you've ever felt unappreciated by your family. Hit that subscribe button. I grew up in Westfield, a comfortable middle-class suburb just outside of Denver, Colorado. Our neighborhood was the kind of place with manicured lawns, neighborhood barbecues, and the sort of quiet competition about whose kids were more successful. In our house, that unofficial trophy always went to my younger sister Sophie. My father, Carson, never tried to hide his favoritism from the start. Sophie was born when I was 3, and according to what my mother Madeline told me years later, my dad had always wanted a second daughter with more personality than his serious firstborn. Sophie certainly lived up to that expectation with her outgoing nature and ability to charm adults from a very young age. Sophie had never met a stranger who didn't end up loving her within minutes, standing proudly next to my father Carson at neighborhood gatherings while I stood silently in my sister's bright shadow, practically invisible. My mother Madeline tried to balance things out, but she was a complete peacekeeper. Instead of confronting the obvious favoritism, especially after particularly hurtful incidents, she would pull me aside and whisper, "Your father loves you too, Bella. He just shows it differently." As I got older, I realized what she really meant was that he showed it less, if at all. The contrast in how we were treated was stark from early childhood. When I made honor roll consistently throughout middle school, my achievements earned a brief "good job" from my father. But when Sophie landed a small role in the school play, he bought her flowers and took the entire family out to celebrate at a fancy restaurant downtown. "Your sister has natural star quality," he explained when I questioned why my academic success didn't warrant the same celebration. "Academic stuff comes easily to you, so it's not as impressive." Nothing came easily to me. I studied until midnight most nights, while Sophie flitted between hobbies and social activities. But in our house, effort was invisible compared to natural charm and social magnetism. The dynamic shifted even more dramatically when our parents divorced during my junior year of high school. I was 16, focused on maintaining my grades while processing the family breakdown. Sophie, at 13, became what my father called his emotional support during the separation. While he leaned on her for comfort and companionship, I was expected to be self-sufficient, the strong one who didn't need emotional nurturing during this difficult time. After the divorce, weekend visitations became another arena for the imbalance to play out clearly. My father would plan elaborate outings for Sophie, shopping trips to the mall, visits to amusement parks, special father-daughter dinners at her favorite restaurants. Meanwhile, I was left to entertain myself at his new bachelor apartment, reading books or watching television alone. If I expressed any disappointment about being excluded, he would label me as difficult or impossible to please compared to her easygoing sister. College presented entirely new challenges that highlighted the favoritism even more starkly. I had worked part-time throughout high school to save money for tuition, fully expecting some level of parental financial support for my education. Instead, I was told I needed to be independent and build a character through student loans and work-study programs. "You're capable of handling anything life throws at you," he said dismissively when I asked about help with college expenses. Meanwhile, when Sophie's time came 3 years later, she received full financial support, with my father covering her tuition, apartment rent, meal plans, and even buying her a car to get around campus. His explanation for this dramatic difference in treatment was that Sophie was more delicate and needed the additional support to thrive academically and socially in college. I put myself through Colorado State University, working 30 hours a week at a local coffee shop while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in marketing and business administration. Those 4 years were a blur of exhaustion, determination, and growing resentment, as I watched Sophie drop out of 3 different colleges, with my father continuing to fund each fresh start without complaint or consequences. College isn't for everyone, he would say, defending her latest abandonment of education. Sophie is creative and artistic. She needs to find her own path in life, and that might not be traditional. After graduation, I secured an entry-level position at a respected marketing firm in downtown Denver. Through sheer determination and consistent 80-hour work weeks, I climbed to a senior executive position by the time I was 30. My professional success was entirely self-made, something I took immense pride in, despite the personal toll it had taken on my social life and relationships. Sophie, meanwhile, had developed a clear pattern of starting entry-level positions with initial enthusiasm only to quit within months when the work became challenging, boring, or required real commitment. She cycled from positions as a receptionist, retail associate, yoga instructor, barista, personal assistant, and dog walker, never staying anywhere long enough to develop meaningful skills. Throughout all of this family chaos, I managed to build a small circle of trusted people who actually saw the truth of our family dynamic. My best friend since college, Gabriella, had witnessed the disparities firsthand during holiday gatherings and family events. "Your family treats you like a walking ATM," she told me bluntly after one particularly difficult Thanksgiving dinner. "They take, but never acknowledge what you're actually giving up for them." I also found real understanding in my relationship with Oliver, a graphic designer I had been dating for 2 years. Unlike previous boyfriends who found my complicated family situation too much drama to handle, Oliver recognized the emotional manipulation and consistently encouraged me to establish healthier boundaries. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm," he would remind me, whenever I felt torn about saying no to yet another request for help from Sophie. The most recent addition to our complicated family situation was Caroline, my father's second wife. She was 15 years younger than him and, unsurprisingly, firmly positioned herself on Team Sophie from day one. From the moment Caroline joined our family, she made herself Sophie's advocate and closest confidant, often suggesting that I needed to lighten up or be more supportive of my struggling younger sister. "Family helps family," Caroline would say meaningfully during holiday gatherings, her eyes fixed directly on me whenever Sophie mentioned her latest financial crisis or career setback. "That's what real families do for each other." What none of them understood, or perhaps chose to deliberately ignore, was that I had been helping silently and consistently for years. But the complete truth about exactly how much I had been financially supporting my sister would not remain hidden forever. The arrangement that would eventually lead to our family's dramatic reckoning began 2 years ago, when Sophie called me sobbing hysterically at 11:30 at night. Her boyfriend of 8 months, Nathan, had broken up with her unexpectedly and asked her to move out of the apartment they had been sharing together. The rent was due in just 3 days, and she had absolutely no savings to secure a new place on her own. "I have nowhere to go, Bella," she cried into the phone. "Dad says I can't move back in with him and Caroline because they converted the spare bedroom into a home gym last month. Can I please crash with you for just a few weeks until I figure something out?" My one-bedroom apartment was barely big enough for me alone, let alone accommodating a second person with extensive belongings and emotional baggage. More importantly, I genuinely valued my personal space and knew from childhood experiences that living with Sophie meant constant chaos, drama, and emotional exhaustion. "I can't take you in," I offered instead, "but I can definitely help you find a place. How much can you realistically afford for monthly rent?" The answer, it turned out, was practically nothing. Sophie had been contributing minimally to the rent she shared with Nathan, spending most of her part-time barista earnings on clothes, dining out with friends, weekend trips, and various hobbies she picked up and abandoned regularly. Now she was facing the harsh reality of Denver's competitive rental market with almost no steady income and absolutely zero savings. Against my better judgment and Oliver's cautious advice, I agreed to help her secure a studio apartment in the trendy Highland neighborhood. The monthly rent was $1,300, which was reasonable for that area, but completely beyond Sophie's financial means. "I'll cover the first 3 months," I told her firmly over the phone. That gives you enough time to find a better paying full-time job and get properly established on your own feet. Sophie was effusively grateful, promising to update her resume immediately and start searching aggressively for higher paying opportunities in her field. I even connected her with several contacts at reputable companies, leveraging professional relationships I had carefully built and maintained over years of networking. 3 months came and went without any meaningful progress. Sophie had taken a retail position at a boutique clothing store, but she was still making barely enough money to cover basic utilities and food expenses, let alone rent. Each month I brought up our original agreement, she had a new excuse ready. The job market was incredibly tough. The boutique wasn't giving her enough hours to make ends meet. She needed expensive new clothes for job interviews. She had unexpected medical expenses that wiped out her meager savings. Just one more month became her constant refrain. I promise I'll figure everything out by then. 1 month turned into 6 months, then stretched into a full year. Before I fully realized what was happening, I had been paying Sophie's complete monthly rent for 18 consecutive months, watching my own carefully planned financial goals slip further and further away. The down payment I had been diligently saving for my own condo remained frustratingly stagnant. The master's degree program I wanted to pursue stayed indefinitely on hold. The European vacation Oliver and I had been planning and saving for was postponed again and again. Meanwhile, Sophie's Instagram and social media told a completely different story than her supposed financial hardship narrative. There were regular posts from weekend getaways to Aspen ski resorts, new designer clothes with tags still attached, expensive restaurant meals with friends, concert tickets, spa days, and shopping sprees. Each time I questioned these seemingly contradictory expenditures, she had a perfectly reasonable explanation ready. My friends treated me to the trip. I found these clothes on an amazing clearance sale. Someone else paid for dinner. I got the concert tickets as a birthday gift. The financial drain was significant and measurable, but the emotional toll was infinitely worse. Every single month, transferring that $1,300 felt like screaming silently into an empty void. No one in our family knew about this financial arrangement, not even our mother. Sophie had sworn me to absolute secrecy, claiming she was too embarrassed and ashamed to let others know how much she was struggling professionally and personally. In reality, she wasn't struggling, at least not in any meaningful way. She had complete free housing courtesy of my hard work and sacrifice, while maintaining the lifestyle of someone making 3 times her actual income. The family narrative remained frustratingly and painfully unchanged. At family gatherings, my father and Caroline would consistently talk about how Sophie was finding her way and doing her best despite life's challenges. My own career successes were acknowledged briefly before conversation inevitably shifted to something more interesting that Sophie was doing or planning. "Are you coming on the family trip to Lake Tahoe this summer?" my father asked during one of our routine Sunday phone calls. "I don't think I can get the time off work," I replied, which was partially true. What I didn't mention was that after paying Sophie's rent, my own rent, utilities, and trying to maintain some semblance of retirement savings, another major expense was completely out of the question financially. "You work way too much, Bella," he sighed with obvious disappointment. "There's so much more to life than climbing the corporate ladder. Look at Sophie. She doesn't make much money, but she knows how to live in the moment and actually enjoy life." I bit back the obvious response that Sophie could afford to live in the moment because other people were subsidizing her entire reality. Instead, I changed the subject completely, swallowing my growing resentment like a bitter pill that got harder to digest each time. The comments about my supposed selfishness began to increase in frequency and intensity. When I couldn't contribute to an expensive group gift for my father's 60th birthday celebration, Caroline made a pointed comment about how some people prioritize differently, with a meaningful look directly at me. When I missed a family dinner because of an important work deadline, my father texted me saying I was too focused on your own life to think about family obligations. The irony was absolutely suffocating. I was literally sacrificing my financial future and personal goals for my sister while being labeled as the selfish one by the very people who had absolutely no idea what I was giving up behind the scenes. Oliver witnessed my struggle firsthand. watching night after night as I calculated and recalculated my monthly budget to accommodate Sophie's rent while maintaining my own financial obligations and trying to save something for the future. This situation isn't sustainable long term, he told me one evening after I had turned down a weekend getaway because of money concerns. You're enabling her to stay stuck in this pattern while actively punishing yourself financially and emotionally. What am I supposed to do? I asked, genuinely conflicted. Let her become homeless? She wouldn't become homeless, he said gently but firmly. She would have to make different choices. Maybe get roommates, move to a more affordable area, or actually work full-time like most adults her age. You're not helping her by removing all the natural consequences of her financial decisions. I knew deep down that he was absolutely right, but years of family conditioning made it incredibly difficult to imagine standing up for myself. What would my father say? How would it affect my already fragile relationship with Sophie? Would this be the final thing that fractured our family beyond any possibility of repair? Still, something definitely had to give. The financial and emotional strain was becoming unbearable. I tried taking a gentler approach first, meeting Sophie for coffee to discuss creating a realistic path toward financial independence. I need to start thinking seriously about my own financial goals. I can't keep paying your full rent indefinitely without any end date in sight. Sophie's eyes immediately filled with tears, her automatic go-to response whenever confronted with anything uncomfortable or challenging. Are you saying you're cutting me off completely? She asked, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. You know I can't afford that apartment on my own income. Do you really want me to be homeless on the streets? No, of course not. I backtracked immediately, hating myself for the weakness. I just thought maybe we could create a realistic plan where you gradually take over more and more of the rent payments over time. She sniffled dramatically, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. I'm really trying my hardest, Bella. I just had to reduce my work hours this month because of my anxiety issues. The manager was scheduling me for too many closing shifts, and you know how badly that affects my sleep patterns and mental health. Just like that, the entire conversation shifted from her taking responsibility to me feeling guilty about adding unnecessary stress to her already fragile emotional state. I left that coffee shop having agreed to continue the full rent payments for at least another 3 months, kicking myself for being such a pushover. The cycle of enabling continued relentlessly, with my resentment growing alongside my rapidly dwindling savings account. Something major would have to break this destructive pattern that was consuming my life. As it turned out, that something would be my patience, finally pushed beyond its absolute limit by one family dinner that went too far. The annual Howard family dinner at the Denver Country Club was a tradition my father had maintained religiously since the divorce. Every year in July, he would reserve their elegant private dining room, invite a few close family friends, and gather everyone together for what he called a celebration of our enduring family bond despite life's inevitable changes. In reality, it was primarily an opportunity for him to showcase his financial success and position as the respected family patriarch, with all of us expected to play our carefully assigned roles in his personal theater production. As the date approached, this year my anxiety mounted significantly. These formal dinners inevitably followed the exact same predictable script. My father holding court while Caroline smiled adoringly beside him, Sophie charming everyone with amusing anecdotes and updates about her latest adventures, and me sitting quietly in the background, fielding occasional polite questions about my work before the conversation moved on to more interesting topics. 2 days before the scheduled dinner, Sophie called with what had become an entirely predictable type of emergency situation. Bella, I really hate to ask this, but I desperately need a favor, she began, her voice taking on that hesitant tone that always preceded a financial request. There's this incredible opportunity for a pop-up art market event downtown, but I need to pay for a vendor table space up front. This could really help me finally start my own creative business. Sophie's business ideas had become a revolving door of unrealized entrepreneurial plans that never materialized into actual income. Last month, it was becoming a freelance social media manager. Before that, she wanted to launch a lifestyle blog focused on sustainable living. None of these ventures ever progressed beyond the initial excitement and planning phase, and certainly none had produced any measurable revenue. "How much do you need this time?" I asked, already mentally adjusting my increasingly tight budget for the month ahead. "Just $400, she said quickly. "The event is this coming weekend, and I could easily make back triple that amount if I sell even half of my planned inventory." "What inventory, exactly? I didn't know you had products ready to sell." "Well, I need to buy some handmade items to resell," she admitted reluctantly, "but I've done extensive research on this market. Trust me, this opportunity is going to be completely different from my previous ideas." Against my better judgment, and despite imagining Oliver's inevitable disapproving reaction, I tried. "Good luck with the art market," I said, trying to sound supportive. "I really hope this one works out for you." The night of the country club dinner arrived, and I made my way there with that familiar mixture of family obligation and deep-seated dread. The private dining room was elegant as always, with pristine white tablecloths, fresh flower arrangements, and the soft, warm glow of candles, creating an atmosphere of refined comfort that my father loved to showcase. My father, Carson, and Caroline were already there, along with their longtime friends, the Martinez family, and the Chen couple, all in their late 50s and early 60s, who had known our family for over 15 years. I spotted Sophie across the room, animated and laughing in conversation with Mrs. Martinez about something that had everyone's rapt attention. As I approached the group, I immediately noticed the large designer handbag on Sophie's arm. The distinctive pattern caught the candlelight perfectly, and from my knowledge of luxury brands gained through window shopping I could never afford, the bag easily cost at least $2,000. That was 5 times more than the $400 I had sent her for the supposed art market business opportunity just 2 days earlier. My stomach tightened as the realization dawned completely. There was no art market event, no vendor table rental, no handmade inventory to resell, and definitely no legitimate business plan. The money had gone directly toward a luxury purchase, while I had been eating budget meals and cutting corners everywhere possible to offset the constant financial drain on my resources. "Bella, you finally made it," my father called out warmly, gesturing toward the empty chair beside him that had been reserved for me. We were just discussing Sophie's exciting weekend plans. I took my designated seat, accepting a glass of wine from the attentive server, and desperately needing its calming effects to get through the evening ahead. "Yes, Sophie was telling us about this wonderful girls' trip to Miami she's taking with her college friends. It sounds like a well-deserved break from everything you've been dealing with lately." I nearly choked on my wine. "Miami?" I echoed, looking directly at Sophie with growing disbelief. She avoided my questioning gaze, suddenly becoming very interested in studying the dinner menu with intense concentration. "Just a quick weekend getaway, nothing too fancy," Sophie said dismissively. "I found an amazing deal on the flights through one of those travel apps." Sophie is always the savvy one when it comes to finding great opportunities and deals, my father added proudly. She has such a natural instinct for making the most of life's possibilities. The server arrived to take our dinner orders, temporarily halting the conversation that was making me increasingly uncomfortable. I sat in stunned silence, methodically piecing together the complete picture of deception. The art market opportunity had obviously been a cover story for the remaining money she needed for a vacation that was likely planned weeks or even months in advance. The designer handbag was probably another recent splurge, justified in her mind as something she deserved after all her supposed struggles. As the appetizers arrived at our table, conversation shifted to other family topics. Mr. Martinez discussed his recent promotion at work. Caroline shared enthusiastic stories from her book club meetings. My father regaled everyone with detailed anecdotes from his recent business conference in Seattle, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Through all of these conversations, I remained unusually quiet, a storm of anger and resentment brewing steadily behind my polite social smile. The weight of financial sacrifice and family blindness pressed down on me with every laugh, every approving nod from my father towards Sophie, and every dismissive glance in my direction. "Bella, you're unusually quiet tonight," my father finally noted during the main course, his tone carrying a hint of mild criticism. "Is everything all right at the office? You're not having problems at work, are you?" "Work is perfectly fine," I replied as evenly as possible. "I'm just processing some new information I've learned recently." "You work entirely too hard," he said dismissively, waving his hand as if my career dedication was somehow problematic. "All those long hours at the office, and for what exactly? You need to learn how to enjoy life more like your sister does." Sophie smiled uncomfortably, perhaps finally sensing the growing tension radiating from my side of the table. "Speaking of enjoying life," Caroline interjected smoothly, "Sophie, why don't you tell everyone about that amazing new yoga studio you discovered in the Arts District?" As Sophie launched into an enthusiastic description of some overpriced boutique fitness class that cost more per session than most people spend on groceries, I felt my carefully maintained patience beginning to fray at the edges. Every single word from her mouth seemed designed to emphasize the stark disparity between how we lived our lives and how our family perceived our respective situations. She was portrayed as the free spirit, the fun-loving one, the person who truly understood how to live life to its fullest potential. I was cast as the workaholic, the overly serious one, the person supposedly missing out on all of life's simple pleasures and meaningful experiences. No one sitting at that elegantly appointed table knew that her carefree, adventurous lifestyle existed entirely because of my financial sacrifice. No one knew that the rent for the apartment where she practiced her leisurely morning yoga routines came directly from my overtime hours and weekend work. No one understood that my own dreams and goals were perpetually on hold so she could chase whatever whim struck her fancy each month. The weight of this completely unacknowledged reality pressed down on me heavier and heavier as the dinner progressed through multiple courses. Each laugh at Sophie's stories, each approving nod from my father towards Sophie, and every meaningful look from Caroline about family values tightened the knot of resentment growing in my chest. By the time dessert menus were being presented and discussed, I was holding myself together by the absolute thinnest strand of composure, knowing that something. Then came the comment that would finally snap that thin thread of composure I was desperately clinging to. "I'm thinking about taking a pottery class this summer," Sophie announced as we all considered the dessert options on our menus. "I've always wanted to try working with clay, and there's this amazing studio in the River North District that offers weekend workshops." "That sounds absolutely wonderful, sweetheart," my father beamed with obvious pride. "It's so important to explore your creative side and pursue artistic expression. You have such natural talent for these kinds of things." "It's a bit expensive, though," Sophie admitted, twirling her hair in that familiar way she always did when leading up to a financial request. "But I think it would be really fulfilling and good for my mental health." "Worth every single penny for something that feeds your soul," Caroline agreed enthusiastically. "Life is far too short not to pursue your genuine passions and interests." I took a long, deliberate sip of water, desperately trying to cool the intense heat rising in my chest. The pottery class was clearly going to be the next expense she expected me to fund, right after the rents, right after the fake business opportunity that became a Miami vacation, right after 2 solid years of constant financial support that nobody else even knew existed. "What about you, Bella?" Mrs. Chin asked kindly, perhaps noticing my obvious discomfort and trying to include me in the conversation. "Do you have any exciting summer plans or new hobbies you want to try?" Before I could formulate any response, my father jumped in to answer for me. "Bella doesn't have time for hobbies or relaxing vacations," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "She's far too busy climbing that corporate ladder to think about personal enrichment or creative pursuits." "I actually had to cancel my plans to take graduate courses this summer," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Budget constraints made it impossible." "Well, that's the problem with your entire generation," Mr. Martinez commented with the confidence of someone who thought he understood everything. "Too focused on accumulating credentials and advanced degrees, not nearly enough focus on life experiences and personal growth. Or maybe some of us have different priorities and financial responsibilities than others," I countered, unable to completely keep the sharp edge from creeping into my voice. My father frowned disapprovingly. "There's absolutely no need to be defensive about this, Bella. Martinez is just making friendly conversation and offering perspective." "I'm not being defensive. I'm simply stating factual information about my situation." "See, this is exactly what I mean," my father said, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "Your sister takes constructive comments and different viewpoints in stride. You always have to argue and make simple conversations difficult and uncomfortable for everyone." The entire table fell into an awkward, uncomfortable silence. Even the Martinez family and the Chens seemed to sense they had accidentally stumbled into serious family tension that went far deeper than a casual dinner conversation. "I don't make things difficult," I said as evenly as possible, fighting to maintain control. "I simply have different circumstances that affect my choices." "What different circumstances could you possibly have?" My father scoffed openly. "You make twice what your sister earns. You live alone with no dependents or major expenses. You should have plenty of disposable income for things you claim to enjoy." That was the precise moment when something fundamentally shifted inside me. The carefully constructed wall I had built around years of accumulated resentment began to crumble completely. 2 years of silence, of enabling, of being the family's invisible ATM while simultaneously being labeled as the selfish one suddenly felt absolutely unbearable. "Dad," I set my napkin carefully beside my plate, "when was the last time you helped Sophie financially in any meaningful way?" He blinked in obvious surprise at such a direct, pointed question. "Well, I helped her with the security deposit on her current apartment when she first moved in, and I've taken her shopping for clothes occasionally when she needed professional outfits." "And who exactly do you think pays her monthly rent?" I asked clearly. The table went completely and utterly still. Even the background noise and conversation from other parts of the country club seemed to fade away as every single person turned to stare directly at me. "What are you talking about?" he asked, genuine confusion written across his face. "I have been paying Sophie's complete rent for 2 years straight, $1,300 every single month transferred directly to her landlord. That's exactly why I can't afford graduate school, vacations, pottery classes, or any of the other things you think I'm so—" My father turned sharply to Sophie, whose face had completely drained of all color. "Is this actually true?" he demanded. Sophie's eyes darted frantically around the table, searching desperately for an escape route that simply didn't exist. It's complicated, Dad. Bella offered to help me temporarily when Nathan and I broke up. It was supposed to be short-term assistance." 2 years is not short-term," I stated firmly, "and I didn't offer anything. You called me crying hysterically at midnight, saying you would be homeless on the streets if I didn't help immediately." "You could have said no," she muttered defensively, avoiding eye contact with everyone at the table. "Yes, I absolutely could have," I agreed. That was my mistake, one that I'm finally correcting tonight. I turned back to face my father, whose expression has shifted from confusion to visible discomfort as the reality of the situation began sinking in. So, when you call me selfish for not taking vacations or pursuing hobbies like pottery classes, I need you to understand that the money that might have gone toward those things has been keeping a roof over your favorite daughter's head instead. Now, Bella, my father started, clearly attempting to regain control of this rapidly deteriorating situation, there's absolutely no need to be so dramatic about this whole thing. Family members help family members. That's what we do. I'm not being dramatic, I replied steadily. I'm being financially responsible. If you were struggling with money, you should have told someone instead of letting this continue for so long. I'm not struggling financially at all, I clarified. I'm choosing to stop subsidizing someone else's lifestyle while being constantly criticized for how I spend my own hard-earned money. I'm sure Sophie is genuinely grateful for all your help, Caroline interjected awkwardly, attempting to smooth over the obvious tension with forced diplomacy. Sophie told me just 3 days ago that she needed $400 for a business opportunity. That money, apparently, went toward her Miami vacation this weekend. And judging by that new designer handbag she's carrying, there have been plenty of other creative uses for the funds I've been providing. Sophie's face flushed bright red with embarrassment. That bag was a gift, she said quickly, her voice defensively. From whom, exactly? I challenged directly. A friend, she replied weakly. Which friend spends thousands of dollars on designer gifts for someone they barely know? I pressed further. The table had transformed into an uncomfortable tribunal, with the Martinez family and the Chens shifting awkwardly in their seats, clearly wishing they were anywhere else in the world rather than witnessing this family meltdown. Mr. Chen suggested gently, trying to diffuse the escalating tension. I think this family discussion might be better continued in private. You're absolutely right, I agreed, standing up from my chair. And I'll make this very short and clear. I looked directly at Sophie. I'm completely done paying your rent. You have 30 days to figure out your own finances like a responsible adult. My father's face darkened with anger. You cannot just cut her off without any warning like this. Where exactly is she supposed to go? She could move in with you and Caroline, convert that home gym back into a bedroom, or she could get roommates like most people her age, or move to a more affordable neighborhood, or work full-time, or pursue any of the dozens of solutions that don't involve me sacrificing my financial future indefinitely. Why are you doing this so publicly? My father demanded, his voice rising. Is this some kind of petty revenge for perceived slights? No, Dad. This is me finally standing up for myself after years of being labeled selfish by people who had absolutely no idea what I was actually giving up behind the scenes. You wanted to know why I don't take vacations or pursue creative hobbies or sign up for graduate programs. Now you know the complete truth. With that declaration, I picked up my purse and prepared to leave the dining room. So you're just going to drop this bombshell and walk away like nothing happened? My father called after me angrily. This is exactly why people find you difficult to deal with, Bella. You always have to create a scene and make everything about yourself instead of handling things maturely like your sister does. I turned back one final time, surveying the table with fresh eyes. The shocked faces of the dinner guests, Caroline's tight and uncomfortable smile, Sophie's tear-filled eyes already calculating her next emotional manipulation, and my father still somehow managing to cast me as the villain in a story where I had been silently saving everyone for years. I'm handling this situation exactly as maturely as it deserves to be handled, I said with complete calm. Enjoy your dessert. I'll see myself out. The sound of my heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoed through the private dining room as I walked away, finally leaving behind the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations and one-sided obligations that I had been carrying for too long. For the first time in years, despite the confrontation and its inevitable fallout, I felt something genuinely close to freedom. The drive home from the country club felt completely surreal. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. But inside my chest, I felt a strange and powerful mixture of terror and liberation. Years of carefully maintained family dynamics had just been completely blown apart at an upscale dining table, and there was absolutely no possibility of going back to the way things were before. I barely made it through my apartment door before my phone exploded with notifications. 3 missed calls from my father, 5 from Sophie, 2 from Caroline, and a concerned text message from my mother asking what had happened. Word traveled incredibly fast in our small family circle. I immediately silenced my phone and poured myself a generous glass of wine, my hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Then I called the one person I knew would completely understand my decision. I did it, I told Oliver when he answered on the second ring. I told everyone the truth about Sophie's rent situation. How did it go? He asked cautiously, clearly bracing himself for drama. About as well as a nuclear explosion at a formal dinner party. Can I come over? I really don't want to be alone with my thoughts right now. 30 minutes later, I was sitting on Oliver's comfortable couch, recounting every excruciating detail of the dinner confrontation, while he listened without interruption, occasionally squeezing my hand in silent support. "I'm incredibly proud of you," he said when I finished telling the complete story. "It took tremendous courage to stand up for yourself like that, especially in such a public setting." "It doesn't feel like courage," I admitted honestly. "It feels like I just destroyed my family permanently." "You didn't destroy anything," he said firmly. "You just stopped pretending that the existing situation was acceptable or sustainable." My phone buzzed insistently again, and I glanced down to see a text from my father. "Your behavior tonight was completely inexcusable. You embarrassed this entire family in front of my closest friends. We need to talk tomorrow when you've calmed down and can be reasonable about this situation." I showed Oliver the message, and he shook his head in frustration. "Still making everything about him, I see. That's definitely his specialty." I turned off my phone completely and spent the night at Oliver's apartment, grateful for the physical and emotional buffer from the storm I had deliberately created. Morning came far too quickly, bringing with it the harsh reality that I would have to face the consequences of my truth-telling. When I finally turned my phone back on around noon the next day, the barrage was immediate and overwhelming. 14 missed calls, 27 text messages, and several lengthy voicemails, all demanding my immediate attention and response. Sophie's texts ranged wildly in tone, from angry accusations like, "How could you humiliate me like that in front of everyone?" to desperate pleadings such as, "Please call me, we need to figure this out together," to emotionally manipulative messages like, "I guess you never really cared about me at all." My mother, who hadn't been present at the dinner but had clearly received multiple versions of what had transpired, sent a typically conflicted message. "I understand you've been helping your sister more than anyone realized, but publicly embarrassing her and your father wasn't the right approach. Can we talk about finding a solution that works for everyone involved?" The most surprising message came from Caroline, my father's wife. "I had absolutely no idea you were supporting Sophie financially all this time. While the dinner table wasn't the appropriate place for this conversation, I genuinely respect that you've been carrying this burden completely alone. Your father is extremely upset right now, but I think everyone needs to acknowledge your perspective in this situation." It was the very first time Caroline had ever shown any understanding of my position in the family dynamics. And despite everything that had happened, I felt a small glimmer of hope that at least one person might be capable of seeing beyond the established narrative. I decided to call my mother first, figuring she would be the most neutral party in this explosive situation. The conversation was difficult and emotionally draining, but not hostile or accusatory. "You should have told me what was happening," she said with obvious hurt in her voice. "I could have helped mediate the situation before it reached such a dramatic breaking point." Would you really have helped? Or would you have tried to convince me to keep helping Sophie and maintain the peace, like you always do? Her telling silence was answer enough to my question. By Monday morning, I needed to return to work and face the real world despite the ongoing family drama consuming my thoughts. I had barely settled at my desk when the receptionist called to inform me that my sister was in the lobby, insisting on seeing me immediately. "Tell her I'm in an important meeting," I said, not ready for another emotional confrontation so soon. 10 minutes later, my direct phone line rang urgently. "Your sister is making quite a scene in the lobby," the receptionist said, sounding genuinely strained. "She's crying loudly and saying she won't leave the building until you agree to speak with her." This was classic Sophie behavior, creating a public spectacle to force my compliance through embarrassment. In the past, I would have given in immediately, rushing downstairs to placate her and minimize the disruption. This time, I took a deep breath and considered my options carefully. "Please ask security to escort her out if she doesn't leave voluntarily," I said firmly, "and let her know I'll call her after work hours to discuss this properly." It felt harsh, but absolutely necessary. For far too long, I had allowed Sophie's manufactured emergencies to dictate my responses and disrupt my professional life. Those days were. Later that evening, I called Sophie as promised, bracing myself for the emotional manipulation tactics I knew would inevitably come. "How could you have security remove me from your workplace?" she demanded immediately, her voice filled with indignation. "I'm your sister, Bella. You can't treat family like that." "You cannot show up at my office and create a public scene," I replied calmly but firmly. "That's a professional boundary I'm establishing right now, and it's non-negotiable." "I wouldn't have had to come there if you had just answered your phone calls," she shot back. "I'm in complete crisis mode here, Bella. What am I supposed to do about my apartment situation? I cannot afford $1,300 a month on my current income." "I understand that," I acknowledged. "That's exactly why I'm giving you 30 days notice rather than cutting you off immediately without warning. You have multiple options available, Sophie. You can find roommates to split the cost, move to a less expensive neighborhood, or increase your work hours to full-time employment. Plenty of people live successfully in Denver on your current income level." "Those aren't realistic options for me," she protested. "You know I can't live with complete strangers, and I need to stay in that specific neighborhood for my social connections and potential career networking opportunities." The conversation continued in exhausting circles for over an hour, with Sophie cycling predictably through anger, desperate pleading, guilt-tripping tactics, and finally, when nothing else seemed to work, vague threats about what this would do to our family relationships. "Dad is absolutely furious with you," she said with calculated precision. "He says you've always been secretly jealous of our close relationship, and this is your twisted way of punishing both of us for that bond." "That's his interpretation of the situation," I replied, refusing to be drawn into that particular emotional trap. "My decision is entirely about establishing healthy financial boundaries, not about punishment or jealousy." After an exhausting and emotionally draining conversation, I ended the call with nothing resolved except my own rock-solid determination to maintain the boundary I had finally set. The next day, my father called my office line directly, knowing I would be more likely to answer a call during business hours when I couldn't avoid the conversation indefinitely. "We need to discuss this entire situation like mature adults," he began without any preamble or greeting. "Your sister is genuinely distraught, and this sudden financial cutoff feels vindictive and cruel." "I'm completely happy to discuss it," I agreed calmly, "but my decision is final and non-negotiable. I cannot and will not continue paying Sophie's rent." "This sudden cutoff is vindictive and you know it perfectly well," he said accusingly. "If you were having genuine financial difficulties, you should have communicated that earlier instead of creating this dramatic public scene at the country club." "I'm not having financial difficulties at all," I clarified. "I'm making a conscious choice to allocate my money differently, toward my own goals and future planning." He sighed heavily with obvious frustration. "And what about your sister's future? Have you given any thought to how this decision affects her long-term stability? Have you thought about how supporting her completely for 2 solid years has affected my future? My ability to save for retirement, pursue education, or achieve my own goals?" "That was entirely your choice," he said dismissively. "No one forced you to pay Sophie's rent in the first place. And now it's my choice to stop, just as it's your choice whether to help her yourself moving forward." There was a very telling pause in the conversation. "Our circumstances are completely different," he finally said. "Caroline and I have our retirement planning to consider." "So do I," pointed out logically. "And unlike you, I'm still in my early 30s. I haven't even been able to start properly saving for retirement because I've been subsidizing Sophie's lifestyle." The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there, with my father eventually suggesting what he called a reasonable compromise, where I would continue paying half of Sophie's rent indefinitely. When I refused this proposal, he accused me of being stubborn and unreasonable, using the same dismissive tone he had employed throughout my childhood whenever I disagreed with his decisions. The following weeks brought wave after wave of confrontations and manipulation attempts from various family members. My aunt called to express her deep disappointment in my supposed lack of family loyalty. My uncle suggested I was dramatically overreacting to what he called a little financial help between sisters. Even my mother, after initially seeming to understand my position, began pressuring me to find some kind of middle ground that inevitably involved me continuing to support Sophie in some capacity. Through all of these pressure campaigns, I maintained the boundary I had set with unwavering determination. With Oliver's consistent support and several emergency sessions with my therapist, I weathered the intense emotional storm of being cast as the villain in my family's carefully constructed narrative. 3 weeks after the explosive country club confrontation, Sophie showed up unexpectedly at my apartment on a Sunday afternoon. Her appearance was notably subdued, her usually perfect designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a basic t-shirt, her typically flawless makeup minimal and understated. "Can we please talk?" she asked when I cautiously opened the door. Really talk this time, not fight or argue. I led her into my apartment, preparing myself for yet another manipulation attempt. But as we sat across from each other at my small dining table, I noticed something in her expression that I had rarely witnessed before, what appeared to be genuine vulnerability rather than calculated emotion. "I've been absolutely horrible to you," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual dramatic flair. "I knew exactly what I was doing was wrong, taking advantage of your generosity month after month. But it became so easy to just let it continue." I found the roommate situation in Capitol Hill. Sophie continued, her voice steady and serious. 3 girls sharing a converted warehouse loft. My portion of the rent would be $800 a month. I can actually afford that amount with my current job if I pick up additional shifts on weekends. That sounds like a realistic and practical solution, I said carefully, still not entirely trusting this sudden shift in her attitude. I also wanted to say I'm genuinely sorry, she said, meeting my eyes directly. Not just for the money situation, but for letting Dad think you were the selfish one all these years when I was actually the one constantly taking and never giving anything back. Her eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in our relationship, they seemed completely authentic rather than strategically deployed for maximum emotional impact. It was so much easier to let him see me as the struggling one who needed constant protection and support, she admitted. I never had to face real consequences or grow up when everyone was always ready to rescue me. For the first time in our adult relationship, we had a conversation that felt genuinely honest and productive. Sophie admitted she had developed a destructive pattern of learned helplessness that served her well within our family's dysfunctional dynamic. I acknowledged that my constant enabling had actually contributed significantly to the problem, stemming from my own desperate need for approval and my deep fear of family conflict. I do love you, I told her sincerely. That has never been in question, but our entire relationship needs to fundamentally change if it's going to survive and be healthy. She nodded, wiping away her tears. I know that now. I'm actually trying to change too. This whole crisis has been a major wake-up call for me. As she left my apartment, promising to keep me updated on her moving process and job situation, I felt cautiously optimistic about our future relationship. Perhaps this crisis would ultimately lead to something much healthier between us. Only time would tell if Sophie's newfound insight would translate into lasting behavioral change, but it was definitely a promising start. 1 month after the explosive confrontation at the country club, the entire landscape of my family relationships had shifted dramatically. The initial explosion had settled into an uneasy but evolving new reality, with boundaries being constantly tested and slowly redefined. True to her word, Sophie had successfully moved into the Capitol Hill loft with her roommates. The apartment was significantly smaller than her previous place, the neighborhood less trendy, but it fit comfortably within her actual budget. She had increased her hours at the boutique and picked up weekend shifts at a popular coffee shop to supplement her income. It's actually not as terrible as I thought it would be, she admitted during one of our newly established weekly phone calls. My roommates are pretty cool people, and I forgot how much I genuinely enjoyed making specialty coffee drinks. Plus, the tips are surprisingly decent. I had maintained my firm boundary about ongoing financial support, though I had helped her move apartments and bought her a modest housewarming gift. These felt like normal, healthy acts of sisterly support rather than enabling her to avoid adult responsibilities. My relationship with my father remained strained, but was slowly and carefully evolving. After several weeks of minimal contact, he had called with what passed for an apology in his emotional vocabulary. I may have misunderstood certain aspects of your financial relationship with your sister, he said stiffly. While I still believe the way you handled the revelation was inappropriate and embarrassing, I recognize that you were under significant pressure that I wasn't aware of. Coming from my father, this qualified as a profound admission of wrongdoing. I accepted it as the olive branch it was clearly intended to be. I appreciate you saying that, Dad. I could have handled the situation more diplomatically, too. We began slowly rebuilding our relationship with cautious small talk on neutral topics, carefully avoiding the obvious landmines of family dynamics and financial expectations. It represented genuine progress, even if imperfect. The most surprising developments came from my mother. After years of dedicated peacekeeping and conflict avoidance, she had apparently been engaging in serious soul searching of her own. I enabled a lot of the favoritism when you girls were growing up, she told me during a lunch we shared near her office downtown. I thought I was protecting you by teaching you to be independent and self-sufficient, but really I was just avoiding difficult conversations with your father about how he treated you so differently. Why are you acknowledging this now? Why after all these years? Because I witnessed what it led to. You carrying this enormous financial burden completely alone while still being labeled as the selfish one. It made me realize how much long-term damage our family patterns have. These conversations with my family members were genuinely healing, but also emotionally exhausting. I found myself turning inward, focusing on rebuilding the parts of my life that had been severely neglected during my years of financially supporting Sophie. With the $1,300 now remaining in my monthly budget, I enrolled in the graduate program I had been postponing for years. The evening classes in advanced marketing strategy and digital analytics were challenging and intellectually invigorating, connecting me with like-minded professionals and opening exciting new possibilities for my career trajectory. I also began working with a financial advisor to create a realistic plan for buying my own condo within the next 18 months. After years of watching my savings account stagnate, it was incredibly empowering to see the numbers moving steadily in the right direction each month. My relationship with Oliver deepened significantly as well. Without the constant stress of family obligations and financial strain weighing me down, I had much more emotional energy to invest in our partnership. We finally took the weekend trip we had been postponing for months, a simple but rejuvenating getaway to a lakeside cabin in the Rocky Mountains, where we hiked mountain trails, cooked meals together, and genuinely reconnected. "You seem so much lighter," he observed as we sat by the fireplace one evening. "Even when you smile now, it reaches your eyes completely." "I feel lighter," I admitted honestly. I didn't realize how much mental and emotional energy it took to maintain that impossible situation until I was finally free of it. The real test of our family's new dynamic came 3 months after the confrontation, when my father suggested resuming the tradition of regular family dinners. The invitation specifically mentioned a fresh start and moving forward together, indicating at least some recognition that the previous patterns needed significant changing. I agreed to participate, but with clear conditions, suggesting we meet at a neutral restaurant rather than the country club with its loaded memories and associations. To my genuine surprise, my father accepted this modification without argument, a small but significant sign of his willingness to adapt and compromise. The dinner itself was awkward, but not completely disastrous. My father, Caroline, Sophie, my mother, Oliver, and I sat around a table at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, carefully navigating conversation like people meeting for the first time rather than a family with decades of complicated history. Sophie spoke about her new living situation and increased work responsibilities with a pride and confidence I had rarely heard from her before. "My manager is training me on the inventory management system. If things continue going well, there might be an assistant manager position opening up this fall." "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said warmly. "You seem really engaged and motivated with this job." "I genuinely am," she replied, then added with a meaningful glance toward me. "It turns out I actually like having structure and real responsibility in my life. Who would have thought?" My father was notably quieter than usual, listening more than dominating the conversation for once. When the check arrived, he insisted on paying for everyone, a familiar gesture of control through generosity. But then he did something completely unprecedented. "Bella, I want to hear more about this graduate program you've started. It sounds like exactly the kind of strategic career move that has made you so successful professionally. It was a small moment, but incredibly significant. A genuine acknowledgement of my choices and path that had been remarkably rare in our previous family interactions. I found myself talking enthusiastically about my classes and professional goals with an energy that surprised even me. Even more surprisingly, my father listened with what appeared to be authentic interest and respect. Looking back on that night at the country club when I finally spoke my truth, I realized it wasn't really about money at all. The $1,300 I transferred to Sophie's landlord each month was simply a symbol of something much deeper. My willingness to sacrifice my own needs and dreams to maintain a family dynamic that was fundamentally harmful to everyone involved. The journey from resentment to empowerment didn't happen in a single dramatic moment, despite how it might appear from the outside. It began with small recognitions and moments of clarity, fostered by people like Oliver and my therapist who could see what I couldn't, that I deserved to prioritize my own well-being in future. Financial freedom created the necessary space for emotional freedom. Once I reclaimed control of my resources, other forms of self-advocacy became possible. I could say no without crushing guilt. I could express my needs without apology. I could exist in my family as a complete person rather than a supporting character in everyone else's story. Perhaps the most important lesson from this experience is that enabling behavior ultimately hurts both people involved. True selflessness must include genuine self-respect. For too long, I had equated being a good sister and daughter with sacrificing my own needs and goals. The peace that comes from living authentically is absolutely worth the temporary discomfort of speaking difficult truths. Speaking your truth might make a room go completely silent, but in that silence, something genuinely new and healthy has space to grow. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family members who didn't understand your perspective? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember, setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's absolutely necessary for genuine